Welcome to the Femme FC Podcast. I'm really excited for today's episode with Margie Davenport. Margie is an exercise physiologist conducting mixed methods research to support gender equity during the perinatal period and understand the impact of physical activity during and following pregnancy. She is a professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology, Sport, and Recreation at the University of Alberta. She holds the Christensen Professorship in Active Healthy Living and is the director of the program for pregnancy and postpartum health. She had the pleasure of being the chair of the SOGC CSEP 2019 Canadian Guideline for Physical Activity Throughout Pregnancy and the upcoming 24-hour Canadian Guideline for Postpartum Physical Activity. This work led to the development of the Get Active questionnaire for pregnancy and the CSEP pre- and postnatal exercise specialization. She is a FIFA women's football consultant. Over the last decade, she has worked with a number of national and international organizations, including FIFA, the International Olympic Committee, World Health Organization, Women's Tennis Association, International Federation of Gynecology and Obstetrics, Sport Canada, the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology, Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists of Canada, and the American College of Sports Medicine to support physical activity during and following pregnancy. Very busy woman. As a former national team athlete, much of her current work is focused on recreational and elite pregnant and postpartum athletes. Her team has made significant strides in promoting gender equity for pregnant, postpartum, and parenting athletes. Over the coming years, they aim to address previously taboo topics such as high-intensity and long-duration exercise, heavy weightlifting, and contact sport during and following pregnancy. Margie, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. So what first inspired you to dedicate all of this time and energy in your career to the research and application and education of understanding exercise in pregnancy?
So actually, that was a very long time ago when I sort of started this journey, almost 20 years or over 20 years now, terrifying. So I'm a former national team athlete, and when I retired, I knew I wanted to stay in sport, but I had no idea what I really wanted to do. So within my family, we have high rates of type 2 diabetes and obesity, and I thought I'm going to solve all diseases with exercise. And so I went back for an undergrad degree in kinesiology, and the only person who was doing exercise and diabetes was somebody who worked with pregnant women. And so I started working with her, had zero interest in pregnancy at that particular point in time. But when I started to learn more about the physiology and got to know the moms and meet the babies afterwards, I really just fell in love with the area. As a woman, I wasn't planning to have kids at that particular point in time, but I knew I wanted to be pregnant in the future. And there were so many gaps back in the early 2000s. We really knew virtually nothing about exercise in pregnancy and postpartum. And so it just sort of captivated me and has kept me fueled for the last 20 years.
And what I think is so interesting about this work is that pregnancy has kind of long been believed to be like a fragile state, and we have to protect the woman and the baby and not allow the woman to do anything, the mother to do anything that could jeopardize the pregnancy. And so it was very kind of protective, seen as fragile. How has that kind of shifted over the course of your career?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There has been a massive shift from the early 2000s. I would say actually the major turning point was in 2019. So that's where in Canada we put together the 2019 Canadian Guideline for Physical Activity Throughout Pregnancy. This was a really ambitious project. It was 3 years, and what we did is actually surveyed all available evidence at that particular point in time. We put together 12 systematic reviews and meta-analyses. That's where a lot of my gray hairs are actually originating from. And so what we found very conclusively with research was that physical activity and sport was very beneficial. We saw major reductions in pregnancy complications, but we also didn't see any increased risk of having a small baby, a preterm or early baby, or having a miscarriage. And those were three of the major fears that we were hearing from pregnant women and their healthcare providers before that 2019 guideline came out. 2019 changed the conversation, moved it away from, is it safe to be active during pregnancy, to really allowing us to start to test the limits of exercise in sport in pregnancy and postpartum.
Can you talk me through a little bit of those 2019 Canadian guidelines and the recommendations for pregnant women in exercise?
So my personal favorite recommendation is we encourage engaging in at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity physical activity spread over 4 more days of the week. Now, we spent 3 years to get to that particular number, which is identical to what we recommend in general adult populations. But the way that we went about it, where we actually developed these systematic reviews as a guideline panel, we identified before we set out that we wanted to see what level of activity would be associated with at least a 25% reduction in the risk of developing pregnancy complications. That 150 minutes was actually based on reduction in risk of having depression. And we even saw greater reduction in risk of having gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, gestational hypertension when you meet that 150 minutes. So 2 other sort of key things within that. So first, we were one of the first to really start to strongly encourage the incorporation of strength training during pregnancy. We didn't have a lot of really strong evidence at that point in time, but the evidence that we did have was very supportive and beneficial. And then the second key change was that we really encouraged and sort of highlighted the importance of pelvic floor muscle training for all pregnant women.
And that's kind of what I was going to ask you next, is that 150 minutes of the moderate intensity exercise. What does that look like? What should it look like? What can it look like for a pregnant woman?
So it can be a wide variety of activities. It can just be as simple as going for a walk. For other people, that would be swimming or cycling, playing a sport. The interesting thing with our guideline, though, that's really changed over the last 6 years now, is that there was very limited information about higher intensity activity, which is why we couldn't make a specific recommendation about vigorous intensity physical activity at that particular point in time. What we did say is that if you wish to exceed that recommendation, that you want to be monitored closely by a healthcare provider. But what we're seeing now with emerging evidence over the last 6 years that I do believe is going to start changing recommendations is that more vigorous activities such as continuing to play sport, going for a run, is actually quite safe and beneficial as well.
Is there any difference in what trimester or what part of the pregnancy a woman is in that might change some of those guidelines?
So a great question. And back in 2019, I would have absolutely said, yes, there are trimester by trimester progressions that you want to be considering. The data doesn't support that. We have new data which comes out, which actually strongly suggests that we want to continue to be physically active, engaging in sport throughout pregnancy when possible, and that the modifications that are often recommended by the time you get to 12 weeks of pregnancy or 28 weeks of pregnancy, and people are making specific broad recommendations to modify, those aren't needed. So what we're starting to change the conversation, and we have a really new, exciting new project coming out with FIFA, where we're really strongly advocating for there's no need to modify until you get to the point where you actually do have to.
And what would be reasons for having to modify? I would imagine comfort level is one of those. Are there other specific times or key moments that somebody would look out for to be like, oh, okay, this is where I might need to modify?
Yeah, absolutely. So comfort, personal choice, those are probably the number one reasons to modify. And there is, that's a perfectly acceptable and encouraged choice. If you're not feeling well, definitely modify at that particular point in time. The one that we really talk about the most, though, is around contraindications. So this really big word that basically means that you have a medical condition where engaging in moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity may be associated with an increased risk of complications. Now, there are two types of contraindications. One are absolute, and the other is termed relative. So absolute contraindications are things like the development of preeclampsia. So we recommend for all women with preeclampsia that they avoid moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity, but we do strongly encourage continuation of light intensity physical activity. So that'd be get up out of bed, shuffle to the kitchen, maybe go for a meal. Those activities are still strongly encouraged because we know that the previous recommendations to bed rest or activity restrict are actually quite harmful both for mother and for baby as well. Now, going to the relative contraindications, these would be things like having a twin pregnancy in the third trimester. We know that a lot of twin moms are told to stop exercising as soon as they hit trimester 3. But what we're finding with relative contraindications that in the vast majority of cases that physical activity is actually encouraged. You may need some modification in terms of perhaps a reduction in intensity, perhaps a reduction in the duration or the type of activity that you're doing, but continuing some form of activity is still strongly encouraged.
Okay, so you also mentioned the Get Active questionnaire for pregnancy. Can you talk a little bit about what that is, what the need was for it, and how it helps to reduce the barriers that pregnant women face to exercise?
So before 2019, as we've already talked about, there's a lot of fear, uncertainty, and concern about exercising during pregnancy. And so virtually every guideline around the world said that you had to stop exercise until you had medical clearance from your healthcare provider. However, when we finished the 2019 guideline and we saw these profound benefits and also a lack of adverse events with physical activity and exercise, we realized that this requirement for medical clearance at the beginning of pregnancy actually was not appropriate. So what we did, because it's still important to identify the small number of women who develop contraindications during pregnancy, that we developed the Get Active questionnaire for pregnancy. It's a self-completed screening tool designed really to empower women to make decisions about physical activity during their pregnancy. If they answer yes to any of the questions, that they are directed to go speak to their healthcare provider to get additional sort of support and consultation. But if they answer no to all of the questions, then they're basically, encouraged to be physically active, whether they're continuing or starting for the first time. Now, I love this. I led the development of this questionnaire, but I'm pretty excited. It's now available in, I believe, 11 different languages. So it's been translated and adapted around the world. So it's pretty exciting.
That's nice because I see there, that barrier of needing medical clearance before doing it, where now it's like, hey, if there are some of these risk factors or previous history, then maybe yes, go get checked out. But if you're good and you've been exercising all along, there's no reason to stop. Go get clearance. Like it's something special now.
Absolutely. That medical clearance was a huge barrier for many women. And oftentimes with previous screening tools, you actually had to get your healthcare provider to sign off on it, which came with an additional, here in Canada, $50 to $75.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, here in the US too, the cost of insurance and then getting in to actually get an appointment with the doctor, it would take a long time and then also cost money. And that's another barrier, of course.
Exactly.
So you mentioned that, and you mentioned already some of the benefits of exercising through pregnancy. You also mentioned that it helps to decrease the risk of some adverse events of pregnancy. So I know you mentioned risk of gestational diabetes, preeclampsia. What are some of the other benefits of pregnant women exercising throughout their pregnancy?
So probably one of the most important ones is helping to support mental health. So we actually found that being physically active in pregnancy reduced the risk of developing depression by 67%. That's a massive number. We know that pregnancy is a time of rapid transformation and change, not just physically, but also psychologically and socially as well. Many women can feel like they are, left on their own. They don't have the supports that they need or they want. But physical activity can help to reduce that stress and overall improve mental health and well-being. We see that being physically active can help with sleep. If you have ever been pregnant, especially by the end of pregnancy, sleep is at an absolute premium. So anything you can do to help support sleep is certainly really, really important. At least it was very much so for me. And then, in terms of other health benefits off the top of my head, we generally we saw a reduction in the risk of having an instrumental delivery. So vaginal delivery by forceps or vacuum as well.
Any thoughts on why that might be?
That's a great question. So not a really evidence-based one, I would say. Yeah, we'll leave it at that.
That's fine. We still don't know is the common answer with a lot of things with female athletes. We're
Unfortunately.
still looking into it. Yeah. Okay, and then some of the adverse events that maybe exercising through pregnancy can decrease the risk of. What are some of the ones that the research shows it does have an effect on lowering the risk of?
hmm So the big ones are a reduced risk of developing gestational diabetes. So that is diabetes that develops during pregnancy. It's quite common, actually. Less common for athletes, but it's certainly very common right around the world. We see a reduced risk of having high blood pressure in pregnancy. So that would be preeclampsia and gestational hypertension as well. Those were the big ones that we saw reductions in.
Okay, and so if let's say a woman takes this questionnaire and the screening tool and is like, good, I'm good to go. I'm a soccer player, I'm a runner, what have you, and I'm ready to exercise through pregnancy. Are there things that might come up during her pregnancy that might make her think, oh, actually, maybe I should now go see a healthcare professional, or maybe I should kind of take a step back in this, or maybe this is something for me to pay attention to? Is there anything that pregnant women should look out for and the people caring for them should look out for during their pregnancy?
hmm So one of the biggest things that we're always watching out for is fetal growth and development. So ensuring that as you are training through pregnancy, that you fuel appropriately. Many of us, if we're training and we're working and we're not sleeping, we may not eat as well as we need to, especially if we're also chasing after older kids as well. So fueling to ensure that we have an appropriate weight gain during pregnancy. Everybody needs to gain a certain amount of weight, and that helps to support the health and growth of the baby. When you're exercising, it's also really important to, as we get into sort of the 20-week mark and later, so the halfway mark of pregnancy, when baby starts kicking, paying attention to fetal movements. If at any point you feel a reduction in fetal movements or no fetal movements, that would be a case where you go speak to your healthcare provider immediately. And then we have other things that may come up if you have unexplained vaginal bleeding at any point, if you have excessive breathlessness or chest pain, or if you were to have your water break, definitely go see your healthcare provider right away.
Yes, that seems, hopefully that is a given. If your water breaks, go do something about it. So you mentioned a little bit earlier that now you're starting to look more into some of the high intensity exercise, maybe some HIIT and heavier resistance training exercises during pregnancy. And this is where, most of the listeners of this podcast will be in and around women's soccer, and I know you're working with FIFA on a lot of projects around female athletes and female athlete health. So how is this changing how we train female soccer players who are pregnant?
Mm-hmm. So current guidance, that 150 minutes of moderate to vigorous intensity physical activity, most recreational and elite athletes are going to exceed that volume of activity pretty quickly, pretty easily. And especially if you're a soccer player or a runner, you're probably going to be really pushing into that really high intensity level. If you do cross training at the same time, you are very likely already doing heavier weightlifting as well. And so for a long time, because we had so much fear and uncertainty about the potential health consequences of exercising too hard, too long, that we were really restricted from a research perspective, that we just simply weren't allowed to start pushing the limits. That's why the 2019 guideline and the associated systematic reviews were so important, because we were able to really conclusively demonstrate that for the vast majority, exercise is quite safe and beneficial. And so from that point, we actually had to stop guessing about what the limit was in terms of what you could actually do while you were pregnant, and start to actually test it. Now, when we talk about testing these more extreme types of activities that athletes would regularly do while they're pregnant, we have to do it in a very stepwise manner. So if you follow my research at all, almost every single sort of question that I have actually begins with a survey. So a survey is sent out, and we're asking a question about heavy weightlifting in pregnancy, or rock climbing in pregnancy, or running in pregnancy, to try and survey all of the women who are already doing what is going well past what current recommendations do. So we can get a bit of an idea in terms of, is there evidence in this survey that there is potential harm of engaging in these activities? Or in the vast majority of cases, what we actually see, for example, with our heavy weightlifting survey that we did, we actually saw that those who continued to lift more than 80% of their one repetition max, so very heavy weights during pregnancy, that they actually had a 51% reduction in the odds of having adverse pregnancy outcomes compared to those who actually stopped or significantly reduced their lift weights. So that evidence allows us to sort of say, okay, this is our preliminary overview of the evidence. Let's go and start to actually test it. And so our next step with our heavy weightlifting was we wanted to know what the actual safety or fetal responses actually were, because when we're concerned about heavy weightlifting during pregnancy, we're actually not really concerned that mom can handle it. We're concerned whether or not baby can handle it. And so what we did is we had a cute heavy weightlifting study where we monitored the fetus throughout our activities, and basically saw how well baby responded. And when we finished that study, we found that the heavy weightlifting was very well tolerated by both mother and baby as well.
I'm super curious, what are some of the responses seen in the fetus during exercise?
Mm-hmm. So sometimes you don't see a whole lot. So, fetus is very similar to us. Their responses are going to be a little bit variable. Systematic review that we did for 2019 guideline, we found that with all activities where we had assessments of fetal heart rate, that across all activity, we see about a 6 beat per minute increase in fetal heart rate. With the heavy weightlifting study, it was pretty maintained actually, but there's still going to be variability between the fetuses. Some went up a tiny bit, some went down a tiny bit, but none of them were anywhere close to where we would expect to see any fetal distress.
And what about during something like running, when the mother's heart rate gets a little bit higher? Is that reflected within the fetus as well?
Yeah, so the other study that we published on about 2 years ago was our high intensity interval training. So back in 2016, the International Olympic Committee put out guidance for recreational and elite athletes, and they put a cap on the maximal heart rate to no more than 90% of maximal effort. And the reason for this is that there were two very small studies where they did graded exercise for a fairly long period of time. I think it was 25 or 30 minutes. And they did see some reductions in fetal heart rate, very transient. As soon as the exercise stopped, fetal heart rate was back and the babies were born healthy afterwards. But what we were curious about is that even though there's this recommendation to avoid above 90%, doing 25 minutes at 90% versus 1 minute 90% is very different. And we know that with HIIT exercise that you can get some pretty profound fitness benefits as a result. So we did look at HIIT exercise, so 10 minutes, 10 times 1 minute above 90% of maximal effort, 1 minute recovery. And again, we saw that fetal heart rate was very well tolerated. One of our next studies that we're going to be looking at is our running study specifically to monitor fetal heart rates. So I'll have to get back to you on that one, but we have very good evidence that suggests that running through pregnancy is actually very, very healthy, especially if you were doing it before you were pregnant.
And I think that the weightlifting and the HIIT training studies specifically, that speaks a lot to women's soccer and the types of workouts that maybe they would be doing through their pregnancy. So can you talk a little bit about your work with FIFA and what you all are looking into with that and some of the reports that you've been putting out recently through there?
So I would say, the soccer moms, the football moms have really been leading the way. They have challenged so much our assumptions about what you can and can't do during pregnancy. So there's a couple of things in there. So the first one is that almost every soccer club federation will recommend to avoid any soccer games, but also often soccer training as soon as you hit 12 weeks of pregnancy. We, as a team, we were actually approached and asked by a professional player she was playing her retirement game, and it was about 2 or 3 days after that 12-week cutoff, and she wanted to know what are the actual risks of playing just those couple of days past. So we went into the research, the previous literature, to see where this recommendation of, you can't play past 12 weeks actually came from. And there was no evidence. The only evidence that we had on contact during pregnancy was actually based on car crash data in animals from about, I believe it was the early 80s. So this recommendation was based on nothing. And we also found that we had done quite a bit of qualitative work. So we're doing interviews with pro athletes. And what they were saying is that being taken out of the game was actually extremely stressful. Most athletes, including myself, we identify very strongly with our sport. You take us out for any length of time, it does cause a lot of stress. It causes a lot of anxiety, and it can cause a loss of self. There is very strong evidence that depression, high levels of stress can adversely impact the fetus. There is no data currently to support that continued soccer training would adversely affect the fetus. And so some of the work that we're doing now is trying to find ways where we can continue to engage soccer players, football players, in their sport with, one-on-one drills, for example, or individual drills, just even being able to kick a soccer ball, which surprisingly so many people are afraid to do as soon as they're pregnant. And so we're finding new ways to be able to help them stay in their sport in a slightly different way, but to help really support their mental health, their identity, but also their physical health as well.
I think it's similar to a female soccer player having this isn't an injury, of course, but having an injury is if you pull them from the team setting and now they're just isolated to gym-based rehab sessions on their own or field sessions by themselves, and there's no sort of integration with the team, it can be very isolating. It can lead to a lot of anxiety and depression-like symptoms for something that's already isolating. And I can imagine that's even more so with pregnancy, because everyone gets injured playing soccer. Not everyone plays soccer while pregnant. Not everyone is on a professional soccer team while pregnant. This is a relatively new phenomenon, because it used to signal end of the career, or women thought, I have to retire before I'm able to have a family. And so, of course, there's the economic and financial barriers that used to be in places as well as, if I'm playing professional soccer, I'm not getting paid enough to support a family, so I can't actually do that now anyway. So all of these factors, all good things leading to this now, like, oh, wait a second, we don't actually know a whole lot about this, and now figuring out what can they actually do. So I love that idea of, like, keep them with the team just as you would if they had a musculoskeletal injury.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think you're absolutely right. Pregnancy is not the end of an athletic career anymore. The really fascinating thing is that we now have data which demonstrates that, for those athletes who are able to and choose to be able to come back, that they can come back beyond what their personal best was before they were pregnant. And if we, talk about, marathoners or endurance training activities, we actually hear from coaches and even the athletes themselves talking about this pregnancy advantage, that pregnancy can actually make them come back stronger. But the key piece is that we have to have the appropriate supports in place. So it's really fantastic that we're starting to see these changes in policy and maternity regulations, that there's increased awareness about the importance of supporting pregnancy and postpartum. And, it's probably a little bit too early to talk about this depending on when the podcast is coming out, but we're just about to put out some really practical guidance through FIFA, where there are decision aids and, practical step-by-step progression and regression criteria, so that athletes can make decisions about play, especially when we're talking about the grassroots or the semi-pro level, where they may not have anybody around them who has experience working with a pregnant or postpartum player. So times are really changing, and I'm really excited for the next couple of years, because I think it's going to sort of leapfrog even more.
Yeah, so what would then be your recommendations? Let's say a listener here is working for a club, and a player comes and tells the team the medical and performance stuff, hey, I'm pregnant, or planning to become pregnant soon. What needs to happen to give the player the support that they need, and also to kind of fall in line and adhere to the best evidence that is out there so far regarding their training?
So in a couple of weeks, the first thing I'm going to say is that this is all going to be publicly available on the FIFA website. There's education that's going to be going along with it. I strongly believe that all athletes, coaches, and healthcare providers do need education about fertility, pregnancy, and postpartum fairly early on. Doesn't have to be in super detail, but just be aware of the possibilities that you can achieve during this time, so that you at least know where to look for additional supports. So certainly, going to the FIFA website is going to be really important as soon as it becomes available. But probably the most important thing is that the athlete needs to be at the center of all decisions. The athlete voice is absolutely critical. For some, they're going to want to pull back right away, and that is completely okay. That is absolutely their choice. For others, if they're feeling well and they don't have contraindications, they may want to continue training well into their third trimester. And we have seen that multiple times. It can be very beneficial for their mental, their physical, but also their social health as well.
I'm really looking forward to seeing those guidelines, and specifically what you said about kind of the practical and applicable, like progressions, regressions that they can follow. So let's go back to that example of a player comes and says, hey, I'm pregnant, without giving, we'll wait with bated breath for those papers and the information on FIFA. But at the very least, what is the team around that athlete? What are the resources that they'll need available to them? bearing in mind not every club has every resource available, or not every league has those
Mm-hmm.
resources available. What would you say would be, let's say, a player either in the NWSL or the WSL, where it is kind of a little bit higher resource area? What should the
Mm-hmm.
team make sure that they have in place to best support the athlete?
Mm-hmm. So, in addition to obviously centering around the athlete voice, it's essential to have their healthcare provider, whether it's in communication between the team doctor and the athlete's personal midwife obstetrician. But having that health perspective is going to be really, really critical. The coach certainly should be involved in those conversations. We also recommend, incorporating a pelvic floor physiotherapist. When we talk about soccer, about 70% of soccer players are going to involuntarily leak urine when they play soccer. The combination of soccer and pregnancy together, that number is likely to increase as well. So finding a really good pelvic floor physiotherapist is essential. And then, of course, you need to have your performance and strength and conditioning coaches as well. So one of the pieces, and I can't give away too much, unfortunately, but one of the key pieces that we do have is this really great communication tool. So it's very easy to go into a meeting with all these people, or everybody but a couple are able to actually join and weigh in. That it's essential to have a written down communication tool so that everybody's on the same page, and that there is this record of the decisions that were made and why as well.
When I think about when I've haven't when I worked in pro women's soccer, there was not a pregnant player on our team. We did have a mom on our team, but there was not
Mm-hmm.
a currently pregnant player on the team. But so
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to put myself back in that place and think about when a player had an injury and the communication that would happen, and also like the ethics involved in communicating medical concerns with staff, with performance staff or technical staff. And I'm wondering what that would look like with a pregnant player in terms of, are we making, because with an injury sometimes we would make sure like agent is informed if there's something with the
Mm-hmm.
contract coming up, right? And so is there something with that needs to be considered with getting family and partner in these conversations? Of course, maybe leaving that to the player to decide and let us know,
Mm-hmm.
but what are your thoughts on what that should look like?
Yeah, so I do think that for the vast majority, that really does come down to the choice of the athlete. So some people will definitely want sort of a broader team, and others simply don't. But at the very minimum, it should be the athlete, it should be their healthcare provider to provide that medical support. But then there also has to be communication with the team as well. So that minimum of three is essential. And beyond that, it really should be the prerogative of the athlete to determine who else is going to have the ability to sort of weigh in on these decisions.
Yeah. So this all was, like I said, I when I messaged you about this podcast, I told you I have four sisters, all of whom are or are planning to have been, are or are planning to one day be pregnant. And so a lot of nieces and nephews, which I'm loving. And one of my sisters, runs all the time. She was a marathon runner, loves running. The other one takes a lot of classes at the gym. And during her pregnancy, she was telling me, "Oh yeah, like the person teaching the classes knows how to modify me." And I'm just wondering, where can people outside of, FIFA and then, the Canadian guidelines, are there any reputable places for people to find information, like a trainer in a gym teaching classes and there's a pregnant woman?
Mhm.
Where would they get this information and this knowledge from to help with any needed modifications?
Hmm. Great question. That's a really tough one. So to try and address that particular issue, because for so long and even still, a lot of the certifications out there are actually unregulated. They may be based more on opinion than evidence itself. I worked with the Canadian Society for Exercise Physiology to develop a pre and postnatal specialization, which is not geared for the general population, but geared specifically for qualified exercise professionals, trainers, basically, so that they would have the appropriate theoretical education. They would understand the practical applications to be able to work with pregnant and postpartum women. And so, looking for a reputable certification is really, really important. When we talk about, for the general population, looking for ideas and ways to be able to modify, I have an Instagram account where we try to put out available research, and now that you're asking about modifications, we can definitely put up some suggestions in terms of modifications. But I think that, this is my own very strong personal opinion. We've put an overemphasis on the need to modify. And I think that if you are feeling discomfort, or if something just doesn't feel right, or you can't do the same thing that you used to, absolutely modification's essential. But what we see very frequently is that we're suggesting you have to modify almost in advance, or to avoid some sort of, I don't know what. But modifications are really important, and oftentimes you can just sort of adapt and change. If you've been in a gym for a long time, you just adapt slightly. There's no perfect way to do it. You just do it so that it's more comfortable for you.
That's such a great point, that focusing on modifications is almost disempowering, and by saying like, here's what you can do, that's a lot more empowering to people. Like, here's how you can do this. That's a lot more empowering. But I will definitely share your Instagram in the show notes so that people can go and follow that and learn all about that. So, Margie, I can't let you go before asking you my 2 rapid fire questions that are more like fill in the blank than anything. So they're easy. So the first one is, I wish everyone working with pregnant female athletes knew this.
I wish everybody working with female athletes knew that you could go over 140 beats per minute.
Yes, love that.
So
Thank
that
you.
comes back from that 1985 guideline, and I literally got messages about it, if not weekly, almost like multiple times a week. It's scary. Old information is misinformation. We really have to change the conversation about that.
Okay, great. And then the second one is, my favorite thing about working within and around women's soccer is.
Oh, it's so exciting. It's one of the best sports ever. If you're ever at a game with me, I was at one the other day. I was easily the loudest person in the crowd, so it's very embarrassing. It's just such an exciting game.
It is. It definitely is. Well, Margie, thank you again so much. I really appreciate it. I think this episode is filled with practical takeaways and also little teasers for future resources coming out, which is great.
Thanks.